Hello and welcome, I hope your coffee is warm, and today we are building a mono red deck. And this is an interesting one because I think this is the worst color, or let's say color combination that you could play in Commander, because it is so fast, and Commander isn't really a fast type of game. But you can win with mono red decks, and they actually have some very interesting strengths as well. So today we will be going over them. And first we need to talk a little bit about what mono red is, because there is a philosophy behind it. Mono red usually is the fire without the fuel. It is the burning deck that goes off instantly, but then fizzles out if you don't play it correctly. You bring aggression to anyone, to the whole board, to other people, and you make other people aggressive as well. And you will just need to play it in a way where it feels right, because mono red is all about doing what you feel, and it is all about doing what you want to do right now, because right now is the only time to do anything. Mono red is not blue or black, it doesn't have control. It is not green, so it doesn't have big creatures, and it's not white for going wide with your creatures. You won't have the most creatures, you won't have the largest creatures, you won't be controlling the game in any way, and you don't want the game to go past turn 5 maybe. So what is red then? Red does not even want to use creatures per se. It could do so, but it is mostly focused on the damage that they do. So sometimes it goes off with tokens, sometimes creatures are pretty huge, but we're always calculating damage first. The themes in mono red are fire, of course. Goblins and dragons are our typal creatures, and we love to attack, we love shiny things, and we love to have fun. Many cards in red just are having fun. They are just here to do something that they want to do. So what to expect for this video? We will be going over the strengths and weaknesses of mono red decks. We will be going over how to build your actual deck and which commanders to choose, staples, and then some combos that you can use in mono red. Of course, there are many interesting cards that you need in this video for any deck that features red, so I think you could use it for that too. In Commander, mono red doesn't really have that many strengths, but we are going by them. And some of the strengths are actually really interesting. First of all, we have the purpose of mono red, which is to sometimes scare your opponents, because mono red can deal a bunch of damage all of a sudden. Also, being underestimated in Commander, because you cannot draw or do anything that has to do with ramp. So many players will sometimes falsely underestimate a red deck. The strengths of mono red are that they can deal a bunch of damage, often with chip damage, so that you are only slightly annoying your opponents. You are, though, very good at it if you aren't very subtle. So, and of course, as a mono red player, you shouldn't be very subtle, so you will actually aggravate a lot of opponents. Sometimes this can be on purpose, but you are not that good at defending, so be careful, so that you at least will be the fastest at dealing lethal amount of damage. You are also pretty quick to add cards, as long as you use them now. So card draw isn't the worst anymore for mono red, but you are very focused on using those cards right now. Your weaknesses are defending yourself against those aggravated opponents. You are not good at long-term draw effects. Ramping isn't something you really do long-term either. You can work around this with treasure or maybe some rituals, but usually you aren't too good at this, and you basically aren't good at anything long-term. So your mindset should be to do things now and do them quickly. You need to burn out really quickly and hope to deal as much damage along the way, and don't leave anything back while playing, but be conservative while deck building, so that you at least find the ways that you can still be a little bit more mid-range at least. Now on to the most important commanders for mono red. We are starting with Krenko, the mob boss. This commander is really interesting because it is so popular. And I think it is mostly popular not as a typal deck. Well, most people would say he is a Goblin commander, but Krenko is really just a token commander at heart, because Krenko has the ability to tap to create X 1/1 red Goblin creature tokens, where X is the number of goblins you control. And Krenko Mob Boss in this way will double every goblin that you have. Now, Krenko actually really is something of a control deck, or maybe a combo deck if you think about it, because Krenko has some great synergies with mostly one card in particular, which is Skirk Prospector, which is a 1 mana goblin, which we already love because we will have one goblin that we can then at least make another 1/1 token of. But it says sacrifice a goblin and you add a red mana. This is an immediate combo with Krenko, because with this extra mana that you create, oftentimes you have enough goblins so that you can play Krenko, have 2 extra mana or 2 extra goblins that you can sacrifice for 2 extra mana, so that you can pay for Krenko's commander tax again, and then create even more goblins when he enters next. The only extra thing that you need is to be able to immediately tap Krenko, but of course red has a lot of ways to do this. So if you have any way to give all of your goblins haste, you can then immediately use Krenko's ability, tap to make enough goblins so that you can play him again later by sacrificing enough goblins to make that mana with the Prospector, and then immediately win. Something else that you could do to be faster is Impact Tremors, so that you will immediately kill your opponents with haste, plus the 1 damage that this enchantment deals whenever a creature you control enters the battlefield. But that's just extra, because if you create an infinite amount of 1/1 goblins with haste, you should be able to win the game. Then we have another really strong commander, and you wouldn't think that mono red with all of its weaknesses has this many strong commanders, but it does. And Magda the Brazen Outlaw is a really strong one here. It's a sort of toolbox commander which really serves for her to be a almost, well, I think often cEDH commander even. So Magda says other dwarves get an extra power, we don't really care about that too much, but then whenever a dwarf you control becomes tapped, you create a treasure token. And you can sacrifice 5 treasure tokens to search your library for an artifact or dragon card. Weird thing is, the strongest part about this is not that you're rank for a dragon or an artifact and putting it onto the battlefield immediately. No, the strongest part is usually the fact that you create treasure tokens whenever a dwarf you control becomes tapped. But more about that later. For the more casual side of Magda, you will play her as a treasure commander, where you will still use a lot of dwarves to create a bunch of treasures, but you might want to win the game through getting a big dragon. Thing is, here what you will do is you will have cards like Zorn or other things that help you create more treasures, and then you will have cards like, well, basically any dwarf, like Dwarven Blood Boiler, which works extra well because it allows you to tap an untapped dwarf you control. And in the more casual version you will have a bunch of vehicles or cards like this that will allow you to tap dwarves whenever you want, so that you don't have to attack with them. That's what you will do for the casual part. Now for the cEDH version of Magda, you will still be using a bunch of dwarves. In this case you will have as many 1 mana dwarves as you can, so that you can get to that amount of 5 treasures as quickly as you can, and look for, or help look for, your 2 combo pieces, which are the Clock of Omens, which is a 4 mana artifact that taps that allows you to tap 2 untapped artifacts you control to untap target artifact, and a card like Universal Automaton, which is the cheapest version. This one is a changeling, so it is a dwarf and it is an artifact. Now what you can do here is you can tap 2 untapped artifacts, so the Automaton and another artifact, to again untap the Automaton. You would say this is a backward strategy, but because you have tapped a dwarf in the Automaton, you will create another treasure, meaning that you have another artifact that you can then tap with the Clock of Omens again, and you will be able to tap the Universal Automaton again. So in this way you can find, you can untap and tap an infinite amount of times, and you are creating an infinite amount of treasures and mana, and with this you should be able to win the game in this deck. So that is what the cEDH version does. I think it is really fun to see that a mono red deck can be so strong. And now this is something that mono red is actually pretty much known for. The Spellslinger archetype is something that is in red, sometimes in Izzet, sometimes in Jeska, but always in red. And Zada Hedron Grinder I think is a really creative way to spin this archetype. So Zada says whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell that targets only Zada, you copy that spell for each other creature you control that the spell could target. Then each copy targets a different one of those creatures. So play one spell on Zada and play as many spells as you want on many other creatures that you have out onto the battlefield. So what works well here? Well, anything that targets a creature and then gives you some extra value. In this deck actually you can be pretty powerful in the later game. For example, Fist of Flame is just a 2-mana card that gives a power and then draws you a card. It also gives a creature trample. But in this deck, this will be a draw as many cards as you have creatures that can be targeted with Fist of Flame. So maybe you are drawing 7 cards, or maybe you are drawing 20 cards in just one spell and you are comboing off into infinity. Now anything that works with copied spells as well, so Magecraft, is really good. For example, Stormkiln Artist says Magecraft, whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery spell, you create a treasure token. Again with the treasures, but in this case you can very easily get, let's say, 7 or 20 treasures, with which you can then infinitely go off with all of the draw spells that you have in this deck. Now onto a thing that red loves doing, which is giving your opponents creatures to attack with. For example, with Alexios, the Deimos of Kosmos, which is a sort of equipment commander, or you could say Voltron, that you give to your opponents, because at the beginning of each player's upkeep, that player gains control of Alexios, untaps it, and puts a +1 counter on it. It gains haste so that it can actually attack. Alexios also has to attack each combat if able, cannot be sacrificed, which is important because otherwise it will be easily sacrificed by your opponents, and cannot attack its owner. It also has trample, so it's very good at attacking while it grows every turn with a +1 counter. Now what you will do in this deck is you will play cards like Sword of the Animist, which is an equipment that says whenever equipped creature attacks, you, which means actually you, may search your library for a basic land, put it onto the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle. Meaning that while your opponents are attacking each other, you also are getting extra lands, for example with this equipment. Other things that work well is just goading your opponents. So for example a card like Agitator Ant is a 3-mana insect that ensures that your opponents want to put 2 +1 counters on their creatures, but when they do, that creature that they put the +1 counters on will be goaded for that turn. So they have to attack your other opponents with their just strengthened creature. Now why this works extra well in this deck is because you want to create a bunch of chaos so that Alexios really shines in attacking all of your other opponents. Next I'll be going over 3 types of burn that are really good with mono red. This one I have actually made a deck tag about, which is Ojer Ashonil, the Deepest Might. This is a god that enables your red sources to deal damage equal to its power whenever they hit an opponent's life total. So this is very good of course with any card that deals a little bit of damage to your opponents. So for example Guttersnipe, which already was a very good card, deals 2 damage usually, but in this case will deal 4 damage equal to the power of Ojer Ashonil, sorry. The thing is that you can double your commander's power, for example, to make this deal 8 damage already. So for every instant or sorcery that you will cast, you will deal 8 damage to each opponent, which can very easily quickly win you the game. So in this way, red can actually be a deck that wins games fast. Another flavor, which is a little bit unique, is Imodane, the Pyrohammer. This flaming hammer of a human knight says that whenever an instant or sorcery spell you control that targets only a single creature deals damage to that creature, Imodane deals that much damage to each opponent. So here we have another type of Gutter Snipe again. Now, this is very different because with Ojer Axonil you wanted to use spells that just dealt 1 damage. In this case, you want to deal 13 damage to a creature. For example, with Shivan Meteor, which will deal 13 damage to target creature. It only targeted 1 creature, so you will deal 13 damage to each of your opponents, which is just glorious. And then last but not least is another type of burn, Solvim Mayhem Dominus, which is the simplest form of it. It doubles the amount of non-combat damage you deal to opponents or permanents they control. So that's it. It's that simple. But it's very good. With, for example, Heartless Hidetsugu, it will double the amount of damage it deals, where it already dealt half of each player's life total. So, as damage. So that is double half their life total, rounded down. But that's still a lot of damage. And then Torbran also works here. Usually these types of replacement effects don't really work well with each other. Your opponents will get to choose which one of your replacement effects they will use. So for example, if you will deal 1 damage, you could say I deal 1 damage plus 2 and then double it for 6 damage. Or you could say I will deal 1 damage, double it to 2 and then deal plus 2 damage for 4 damage. And your opponents will essentially get to choose between getting dealt 4 damage or 6 damage. Maybe they want to be dealt 6 damage, but usually they don't. Still, that is a lot of damage. For just 1 damage you will get 4, so that is doubling twice at least. Lathliss is a really typo commander, so I won't be saying a lot about the cards that he works well with. Lathliss wants to work with dragons, and that's fun enough. She says whenever another non-token dragon you control enters, you create a 5/5 dragon aside from that. So while you are playing big dragons, you will get extra big dragons. Now this typo version is a little bit weird, because it is Chandra typo. Chandra, Fire of Kaladesh, is a commander, and can be because it is a legendary creature before she transforms into Chandra Roaring Flame. So Chandra, Fire of Kaladesh says whenever you cast a red spell you untap Chandra, and then you can tap Chandra to deal 1 damage to target player. If she has dealt 3 or more damage this turn, you can transform her into Chandra Roaring Flame, which is a Planeswalker that can deal 2 damage to target player, deal 2 damage to target creature, or as an ultimate deal 6 damage to each opponent. Each player dealt damage this way gets an emblem where they get dealt 3 damage every upkeep. Now thing is, this really isn't why you are playing her, it is more for a flavor reason. Because cards that work well here aren't really the strongest usually, but Chandra's Regulator is a very strong card for Chandra decks, which says whenever you activate the loyalty ability of Chandra's, you may pay 1 mana damage, I wanted to say. Basically mana is damage, wouldn't you say? But you pay 1 mana to copy that ability, and then you may choose new targets. You can also for 1 mana discard a mountain or a red card to draw a card. And in this deck you are of course mono red, so you will basically be able to discard draw anytime you want with this. But aside from that, you will play a bunch of Chandras, which always deal some damage to your opponents, maybe get you some mana, so you have ramp in this deck, and a lot of removal, because they can almost always deal damage to creatures as well. Now this is a bit of a weird one, Norin the Wary. Norin the Wary has the effect to when a player plays a spell or a creature attacks, remove Norin the Wary from the game and then return it to play under its owner's control at the end of turn. So every turn you will basically be able to get Norin the Wary to enter the battlefield under your control again. Now this works very well with anything that wants creatures to be blinked or enter the battlefield. For example, Confusion in the ranks is often used in this deck because it is an enchantment that says whenever a creature, for example, comes into play, its controller chooses target permanent another player controls that shares a type with it, and you exchange control of those permanents. Now if Norin would enter the battlefield, you swap it with another creature from your opponents. They will get Norin for a little bit, but then whenever another thing is played or they attack with Norin, Norin will leave the battlefield and at the end of turn again enter the battlefield under your control, so that you can steal another of your opponent's creatures. Now other things that work well are anything that works well with things entering the battlefield on your side. That is just very strong in this deck, and it makes it a very weird one. For these last ones I won't be going over things that are good in their decks because it's really simple in a way. Ashling Flame Dancer is a commander that wants you to play a bunch of instants or sorceries or copy them. So I think that is why it's popular in spell copy decks. She says whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery, you discard and draw. If it is the second time this ability has resolved, so you will keep discard drawing. But if it's the second time, you also get to deal 2 damage to each opponent and each creature they control, so mini board wipe on top. And then if it's the third time, you add 4 mana, so that you can play some more cards. Of course, this is very good with anything that can copy or play a spell, and you will basically be building a storm deck. Zurzoth, the Chaos Rider, is a great devil that wants to work with other devils, because this devil says whenever an opponent draws their first card each turn, if it's not their turn, you create a 1/1 devil with when this creature dies it deals 1 damage to any target. So these creatures will be able to deal with damage in almost any case. Then whenever 1 or more devils you control attack 1 or more players, you and those players each draw a card and then discard a card at random. This will of course mean that they draw their first card on not their turn, so that you will create another 1/1. Discarding a card at random can be a very big drawback, especially if drawing a card was a drawback to begin with. So you will in this deck play a bunch of cards that punish your opponents for drawing cards, and cards that will make sure that your opponents are drawing cards on not their turn. And then Birgi, the god of storytelling, is another storm commander. She says whenever you cast a spell, you add a red mana, and you don't lose this mana as steps and phases end. Also, creatures you control can boast twice, but you are really not looking at that ability. You are mostly looking to play 1 mana instants and sorceries, or maybe little spells, that also help you draw a card, so that you can infinitely cycle through your deck and make sure that you're using your infinite spell power. Now, there are some combos in this where you play a creature and then for 3 mana can return it. Or you play a creature for 3 mana and then for 1 mana, you can return it, give yourself some extra mana and infinitely play an infinite amount of creatures. But aside from that, this is really a combo-tastic card on its own, being mostly an engine deck. Now, if you want to choose your mono red commander, you have to answer 2 questions. You can do this in the comments, of course. You first have to choose from 1 to 5 how much damage you want. You can also just say yes to the damage. You also have to choose from 1 to 5 how many explosions you want in a turn. Now, I know your answer will almost always be 5, as you are a mono red commander player. So just tell me that it is so, and I will help you find your perfect commander. Now, if you want to win the game as a mono red deck, you will need one of 2 of these things. You will need a bunch of creatures and a bunch of haste. So for example, Rising of the Day or Aggravated Assault is great with this. Or you will need ways to ping your opponents. For example, you can have Impact Tremors or maybe Terror of the Peaks whenever a creature enters, so that you will deal damage. Or you can have Goblin Bombardment to sacrifice creatures and deal damage, or you can use cards like Gutter Snipe that will deal damage whenever you play instants or sorceries. So things like that will add up on damage and annoy your opponent, so be afraid of them too, but of course think about what you want first. Now mono red has a surprising amount of very great combos, like the very famous Jewelcaster Mage comboed with Twin Flame. To use this, you need at least one creature, Jewelcaster Mage, and Twin Flame in hand, and then 5 mana. So what you do is you cast the Twin Flame by paying its mana cost, and you target a creature. So you choose a number of target creatures, and for each of them you create a token that's a copy of it except it has haste, and you exile the tokens at the beginning of the next end step. Already a very strong sorcery, by the way. But then, holding priority, you cast Jewelcaster Mage by paying 3 mana. Then when it enters, you double the Twin Flame, and with it you target Jewelcaster Mage. You then resolve the copy of Twin Flame and create a token copy of Jewelcaster Mage, which can then again copy the Twin Flame. Now, while you are doing this, you are creating an infinite amount of creature tokens with haste and an infinite amount of enter the battlefield effects on top of that, but really you weren't thinking about it because you have an infinite amount of Jewelcaster Mages to win the game with. Red also has the Underworld Breach, which is a very strong card that allows you to get any card from your graveyard back as long as you have enough fuel to exile to the Underworld Breach from your graveyard. Now if you combo this with Wheel of Fortune and Jeska's Will, which are both also very strong cards, you will be able to create an infinite amount of draw triggers for all players, and in this way you should be able to win the game. Now how this works is if you have Underworld Breach on the battlefield, you can exile a certain amount of cards equal, well, where the escape cost, so where you play the card, is equal to the card's mana cost, but then you have to also exile 3 other cards from your graveyard. So this is basically a combo where you need 6 cards in your graveyard, 6 cards in your graveyard plus your hand, and then you will need to make sure that an opponent also has at least 6 cards in hand. And then you can combo off from there. Now what you do is you have the Underworld Breach on the battlefield, then you cast Jeska's Will for 3 mana plus exiling 3 cards, so that you can then use it to add an amount of red mana for each card in target opponent's hand. Now with this you will be able to get, in this case, 6 or more red mana. Then you cast Wheel of Fortune from your graveyard by also paying 3 mana and exiling 3 other cards from your graveyard, and you will cause each player to discard their hand, so these 6 cards were discarded there, and draw 7 cards. So that you have 7 cards, your opponents have 7 cards, but you also got another at least 6 cards into your graveyard, so that you can do this combo again. Now Cleaver Assault is a very red combo. This is a combo where you play the equipment Reaver Cleaver, which is an equipment that gives a creature +1/+1 trample, and whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, create that many treasure tokens. Then Aggravated Assault is a sort of combo piece that says for 3 mana you have an enchantment that you can then pay 5 mana for to untap all creatures you control and get an additional combat phase. Now this means that if you attack your opponents and deal at least 5 damage to them with your Reaver Cleaver creature, you will be able to get at least 5 treasure tokens from the amount of power that you hit them with. Then with those 5 treasure tokens you can pay the cost for Aggravated Assault and get another combat. Now as you have already dealt that 5 damage, I assume you will be able to deal that 5 damage again, and make sure that you deal that 5 damage at least, get another 5 treasures or more, and then you will be able to get another combat. So that is the loop. Blasphemous Act and Repercussion is a little bit of an let's say, assault to injury combo, where Blasphemous Act will deal 13 damage to each creature, and Repercussion will then say, whenever a creature is dealt damage, Repercussion deals that much damage to that creature's controller. Now, be careful with this one, because this says whenever a creature, also your creatures, are dealt damage, Repercussion will deal damage to you as well. And Blasphemous Act will deal 13 damage to each of your creatures too. But if you can make sure that your opponent's creatures are mostly dealt damage, you will be able to deal 13 damage to your opponents for each creature that they have. So this will mean that you will very easily win the game through this. You might almost forget about him, but Kiki-Jiki is also a red card and also very famous for its combos. Now Kiki-Jiki can be comboed with many cards like Zealous Conscripts. What you do is you activate Kiki-Jiki, and by tapping it you create a token copy of Zealous Conscripts, and they will get haste from the Kiki-Jiki ability. Then when the Zealous Conscripts enter, it will trigger and you will be able to untap Kiki-Jiki so that you can tap it again to create another Zealous Conscripts. Now this works with any of these effects, but I think it's very fun that it can be in mono red as well. This was actually the first combo that I heard about. It is Godo plus the Helm of the Host, and it might not be the best, not in red even, but it's very fun. What you do is you have Godo and the Helm of the Host on the battlefield, and you will make sure that you attach the Helm of the Host to Godo. Then at the beginning of your combat, the Helm of the Host will trigger and you create a non-legendary token of a copy of Godo. It will also have haste. The Godo token will enter the battlefield, so you can search your library for an equipment and put it onto the battlefield. This is just, in a way, an extra. Then you declare the token Godo as an attacker, and the token Godo will trigger. You will untap it and all samurai you control, and that will cause you to get an additional combat phase after this one. Now, Godo will still be there, but the most important thing is that you will get another copy of him, so that you can then again repeat the process and attack an infinite amount of times, maybe adding some samurai on top of that.
Now for the core of any red deck, you will need at least red. Now the thing is, ramp isn't that good, so you can always fill out your ramp slots with mana rocks. But there are some things that you could do. For example, you could make a deck full with rituals, like Seething Song, which is a 3 mana instant that will give you 5 red mana back. Now this is very good because you get an extra 2 mana, but it does force you to play a card for it, and you will lose that card forever. So it is a little bit of card disadvantage in this way, where usually you will keep the mana rock. Now you get 2 mana immediately, but you lose the card. Now, other things you can use are treasure. For example, Goldspan Dragon is very good because it is a 5 mana dragon with flying and haste, and it's a 4/4, but also because whenever it attacks or becomes the target of a spell, you create a treasure token, and treasures can add for 2 mana instead of 1. Now this is of course very good because every time Goldspan Dragon attacks, you get an extra 2 mana for use later on. Cursed Mirror is a very good mana rock because it's a 3 mana rock that adds 1 mana, which isn't too good yet, but it can also enter the battlefield and become a copy of any creature on the battlefield for 1 turn. It will also have haste. Now this is of course very good because you can immediately attack your opponents with it once, and red really likes that on their mana rocks. Birgi is also very good because it adds a red mana whenever you cast a spell. So that is one way to storm off. And of course we've talked about Reaver Cleaver, which is a card that gives you treasure for the amount of damage dealt to your opponent or their Planeswalker. So that is of course very good on its own without being in a combo too. For removal we have a lot of riches. We have for example Chaos Warp, which is one of the best. It's a 3 mana instant that puts a permanent on top of their owner's library. And then they get to reveal, they get to shuffle their library of course first, and then reveal the top of their library, and if it's a permanent they can put it onto the battlefield. But usually this is a great trade for you, and it targets anything that can be targeted. Vandal Blast is really good. It could be sort of a board wipe too, only targets artifacts, but could also target all of the artifacts that you don't control, and that's just very effective. And of course we have a bunch of things that just deal damage, like Lightning Bolt, which deals 3 damage to any target. So that's very simple but works. Abrade, also very simple, but kind of best of both worlds. Deals 3 damage to target creature, or destroys an artifact for just 1 mana more. These are just examples, of course. There are many removal spells in red. For board wipes, we actually also have some options, like Blasphemous Act, which becomes cheaper for every creature on the battlefield, and then deals 13 damage to each creature. This could not deal lethal damage to every creature, but usually will. Chandra's Ignition is 5 mana to have target creature you control deal damage equal to its power to each other creature and each opponent, leaving you with at least 1 creature, but maybe even more. And Chain Reaction is a card that deals X damage to each creature, where X is the number of creatures on the battlefield. So with enough creatures out on the battlefield, this will be a board wipe too. Now card advantage is, I think, maybe our weakest point, because for example we have Professional Facebreaker, which is a 3 mana card that does a bunch of things. It says whenever 1 or more creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, you create a treasure, so sort of ramp again. Then you can sacrifice a treasure to exile the top card of your library, and you may play that card this turn. Now thing is, treasures were already a one-time thing, but now you can also use them for one-time card draw that you can only use in this turn. The weakness, of course, is that you have to use it right now and can't think about the timing. The strong part of this is that it's actually very effective. There are other ways to do this, like Etali, which says whenever it attacks you exile the top card of each player's library, and then you may play them without paying their mana costs, which goes against some of the weaknesses of this type of draw. Ragavan, very popular, says whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you red ramp, so you create a treasure token, and exile the top card of that player's library, which you can then play until end of turn. So most of the cards that are good in red that give you some extra cards are like this. There's of course looting, but that's not card advantage. You can use it to strengthen your hand, but you won't get extra cards or card advantage through it. Weirdly, red also has a bunch of ways to protect itself or its creatures, like with Deflecting Swat, which is a 3 mana instant that says you may choose new targets for target spell or ability. So you can redirect any spell that targets something. Even adds the ability to, if you control a commander, to play this card for free. So that is an extra, which is really weird that red has these great defending spells nowadays. We also have, for example, Hexing Squelcher, which is a new one that says it can be countered, spells you control can be countered, it has ward paid to life, and other creatures also get that ability. Now this means that your opponents will have a hard time of removing your creatures because they need it to at least pay 2 life every time, and they can't even counter your spells anymore. Now this is great because we hate countering spells, but the thing is, we are actually becoming better at it. Untimely Malfunction is a sort of counterspell which says change the target of target spell or ability with a single target. Redirect Lightning says change the target of target spell or ability with a single target. And we have Red Elemental Blast, a blast from the past, which says counter target blue spell or destroy target blue permanent. So very effective, as most players will play blue. I have 2 all-stars here that where you can afford them, you should use. These are Jeska's Will, which is a 3 mana sorcery that says you can choose one, or if you control a commander you can choose both. Add a red mana for each card in target opponent's hand, which can often be 6, 7. But you can also exile the top 3 cards of your library and play them this turn, which is red's draw version. We have not card advantage but Gamble 2, which is a 1 mana search your library for any card, put it into your hand. Way too strong you might say, but black already had this and doesn't have the drawback of discarding a card at random, which is a big drawback, but again, you can choose any card, and if you have to discard it, well, that's a sad time, but usually you have enough cards in your hand while using this to make sure that you don't have to. And also it's just fun. Now, some last tips are that you have to be fast and you have to rebuild where you can. This last part is actually very important, because if you find an opportunity where you can rebuild, do it so that you can deal more damage later. You also have to remove players where possible. You even need to deal with other aggressive players to make sure that those players that are more late game are removed as soon as you can. You also need to work towards little combos. This has to do a little bit with rebuilding where you can, but you need to make sure that you work towards those 1-2 punches where you can make sure that you deal extra damage. Now I want to thank you for watching. Have a nice day and let me know what commanders you are going to build after this. Bye.